Hello, welcome to Meet Me at the Movies. Noel T. Manning II here. We appreciate you spending time with us. And not too long ago, Thomas and I got together. I think he was wearing exactly the same thing. And we thought we would dive into a special educational edition of Meet Me at the Movies, looking at films and filmmakers that faced either bans, boycotts, or barricades to their films, or to their actually opportunities to make films. And we kind of challenge you as an audience to look at yourself and what do you self-censor? You know, what are the things that kind of shape your personal beliefs relating to the films you watch and the films that you allow others to watch around you? Maybe it's your kids. It could be a lot of things. I mean, what are the kind of films that you would show to your church group if you have a church group? So those are some things to kind of consider. That always is part of that censorship. Censorship, I think, Thomas, is not always a bad thing. Because, I mean, I sure wouldn't take you to see the movie Babylon when you were like 3 years old. So how you doing, man?
I think you got to wait till I'm at least 5 to see that one. Yeah, because three is just way too early. So
absolutely. And there is a story. I don't think we'll get to it, but I did do some really interesting edits to some films for Thomas when he was younger, just so he could see the story, the narrative. So I did some. Cutting editing myself to make sure that happened. So if you missed the first part, this is part 2. It's okay. You can go back and find it somewhere. But Thomas, you know, one of the things that we talked about as it related to movies and filmmakers that receive these bans and boycotts and barricades relates to things like violence and religion and cultural identity and pushing the boundaries of societal norms. There are a lot of different reasons, but politics can definitely play a role in that, and those politics can be internal or external for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the films that we're going to be discussing here, widely regarded as one of the greatest, most influential, most significant films of all time, going back to 1941 and Citizen Kane. And there was a certain media mogul during that time who tried to sabotage the making of this film because I believe he felt that it painted him in a poor light. Although it wasn't specifically directly about him, but you can use some context clues to say that it was about a figure just like him.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great documentaries about the making of this film, and the film is Citizen Kane. Orson Welles, who was a first-time feature filmmaker, RKO Radio Pictures gave him unprecedented creative control, which is really, really crazy. But you mentioned, William Randolph Hearst. He had this campaign, literally a campaign against this film because it did paint him or someone like him in a pretty horrible light. And it was, Randolph Hearst had tons of newspapers. And so here's some of the things, Thomas. He banned any mention of the film in all of his media outlets, which also included some of the most widely read newspapers in America at the time. And Hearst also had a lot of Hollywood connections. So he tried to put a lot of pressure on studio executives to kind of suppress and keep the film from being released. RKO Pictures actually got threats from major studios and theater chains that were all influenced by what Hearst was doing. And Hearst also tried to have some of his cohorts in crime attempt to buy the film outright so it could be destroyed. There were some theaters, Thomas, that refused to screen the film because they were afraid of retaliation from this empire, and it was an empire that Hearst had. The movie did get critical acclaim, but the controversy kind of followed Orson Welles throughout his career. There were some mixed reactions upon the release. Critics praised the film's innovation, but the limited distribution did hurt the financial success of it. Now, here's something interesting. The Oscars, nominated for 9 Oscars, but only received Best Original Screenplay. And a big part of that was there was a lot of industry pushback because of fear of that retaliation. You look today, this film, Citizen Kane, really widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. And it really is landmark cinema. I think it's once again another case study on censorship and the power of media or those who control the media that can influence and impact what happens. This movie is often brought up when you talk about corporate influence over journalism and entertainment. So at what point is there really a free press? This really speaks to that. So Citizen Kane, definitely a landmark film worth talking about when you're talking about films that faced some challenges and even getting seen. Any thoughts, comments, final things you want to make sure you share about Citizen Kane?
Well, even after everything that was raging against it, all of the wars from within the industry, the fact that we're still here talking about it 83, 84 years after its release, life and cinema finds a way. It does. If you make a piece of art that is, the best pieces of art find a way to just withstand whatever storm comes their way. And Citizen Kane is an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think films can help shape public perception and endure beyond their controversies, which is exactly what you were saying. Well, Thomas, current events have a key way of playing into what is shown on screen and also what we are able to experience on screen. I'd love to talk about one of those that happened in the 1970s, but I'm going to fast forward because I want to make sure that you get a chance to talk a little bit. So, September 11th was a time that anyone who was alive then and of a certain age remember, and they remember it quite well, the terrorist attacks, and especially those visible and just images you cannot get out of your brain of the World Trade Center towers collapsing. And you got something you want to talk about relating to those September 11th attacks as well.
Yeah, so that was September 11th, 2001, and the original Spider-Man film directed by Sam Raimi with Tobey Maguire. That the final film for that didn't come out until 2002, but the very first teaser, which was our very first look at Spider-Man in this cinematic iteration, was released prior to the September 11th attacks and featured the World Trade Center in basically as the central piece of this massive action set piece that we were seeing. There's this bank robbery, and then the robbers escape in a helicopter, but Spider-Man catches them in a web that he creates between the Twin Towers. And that, now, it's extremely difficult to find that clip online. It was basically scrubbed from existence for a while, and then a few years ago it kind of came back, and you can find it if you look in the right place. But it was just really it's kind of eerie watching that and knowing that just a few months later that what would ensue, and that's something you see in a lot of films that take place in New York City during that time period. The film rom-com that you and I both like, Serendipity, with Kate Beckinsale and John Cusack. This film was released in October of 2001. So just 3 or 4 weeks after 9/11. And shots of the World Trade Center on the New York City skyline were digitally removed, and at the request of the producers, because out of respect and out of reverence for just this tragedy that had happened. And that's and I think a few other films on your radar as well. I think Men in Black 2 was it? That was another issue. And just when you have something as iconic as the New York City skyline, and then these structures that are impossible to miss when you're capturing that entire cityscape, that's going to affect the way that we look at that city for years and years to come, whether on film or just in general.
Yeah, I think that especially when there's a tragedy, Thomas, that happens to a people group or to a country or even a global catastrophe, sometimes those wounds are so fresh, it is really difficult to be able to experience something in a way that can't keep you from thinking about the wound and the hurt and the pain and the suffering. And so sometimes it takes a distance of time before we're able to kind of open up our eyes and look at things a little differently again. And now we can look at films that are even talking about that time period, and while the wound is still there, it's different. It's different. So having that space, that timeline space, definitely makes a difference for sure. But what happens culturally, what happens in the now, truly has an impact on cinema, Thomas. And we're going to take a quick intermission, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how the now impacts what studios choose to produce and how they choose to produce it at times. We're going to be talking about an MCU film that has that in mind right after this quick intermission.
Won't you come and meet me at the movies? Won't you come and watch a flick?
Education is our most powerful tool to improve and change our world. Hi, I'm Rhonda Benfield, your host for School Matters. Join me for a new program every other week with information from and about the students and staff of Cleveland County Schools. Discover what our schools are doing to challenge students and help them reach their full potential. You can catch us on Spectrum Cable Channel 19 or stream us live on c19.tv.
Won't you come and meet me at the movies? Won't you come and watch a flick?
Hi, and welcome back into Meet Me in the Movies. Thanks so much for joining us here. I'm Noel Thomas Main III alongside Noel T. Main II, no relation, but we are talking about boycotts, bans, and barricades as it relates to the cinematic landscape and this ever evolving industry that is always forced to reckon with the circumstances in the world outside of it. And we've had a very lively discussion so far, going all the way back to the 1920s and some of the revelry that from that ensued the Hays Code, and then the trajectory of the MPAA. And now we are heading into the 2000s as well. And I think, we started out in the silent era, and now we have reached the MCU era. And there's a film from 2013, which was a film that was a massive hit overseas and domestically. But if not for some changes that were made to the material, it probably would not have had the success that it had in certain territories. And this film is Iron Man 3, and I'd like to give you a chance to talk about some of the context there.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, Iron Man 3, 2013, as you mentioned, Shane Black directed this film, and 1.2 billion worldwide, Thomas. So big money maker for sure. Hollywood understood, especially pre-pandemic, the impact of international cinema, especially in certain countries. Now, you go back several years to the 1970s and early 80s, and it was Earl Owensby who really discovered that before Hollywood kind of jumped on the Owensby bandwagon. But pre-pandemic, worldwide grosses were amazing when you looked at other countries. And United States of America is still huge, but some other countries like China, India, and even Russia at that time, for example, were big on that kind of global scale. Now, when you send movies to other countries, there are things that have to happen to even be shown in these other countries. So a lot of times there are cuts that will have to be created, or storylines that may have to be changed. Great example is this movie Iron Man 3. There was a particular supervillain, Thomas. What was this supervillain called in the comics?
The Mandarin. Yes, that's the Mandarin.
Absolutely. The Mandarin was first introduced in 1964, and he was a Chinese supervillain. Martial arts expert, 10 powerful rings of alien origin. And he really kind of embodied what that Cold War era with the fear of communist in China and Eastern mysticism. And so that would not play well if it was released in 2013, because China was one of the biggest global markets for filmmaking. So the MCU radically reimagined the film and the character. So instead of it being a Chinese warlord, it was a theatrical manufactured persona portrayed by Ben Kingsley, and the real antagonist in the film was Guy Pearce, who was this kind of businessman, and the Mandarin was a decoy. So it was completely changed so it could appeal to the Chinese audiences. Also, now here's something that's really interesting. They didn't want that box office buck from China, and they wanted to make sure it got past the Chinese government and the censors because there were some very strict guidelines. But they also included several minutes of scenes that included Chinese actors, specifically so it could impact and have a success there in China. And so, it didn't make that much of an impact. Actually, there was some takeaways from it that the Chinese audiences honestly felt that it was thrown in, it was kind of shoehorned, that it didn't make an impact. They weren't really sure why it happened. It didn't need to happen for that film to find success. But this was really kind of one of those turning points for films that decided to make changes because of how they could impact global box office. And there was another film that did that as well, which I won't go into a lot of the details on, but the remake of Red Dawn did that as well, looking at some different villains. Questions, thoughts that you may have on Iron Man 3?
Oh yeah, so interestingly enough, this is one of the few MCU films that I never saw in theaters. That's just a memory that sticks out. And then once I came back to it a few years later after its release and explored, some of the cultural context there and how, it was very necessary to rework the portrayal of the Mandarin character and some of the racial stereotypes there. I think Iron Man 3 is one of the more memorable. I mean, there are many memorable films in the MCU, but I think this is the one culturally and just what it means, socially and thematically as a cultural artifact. It's one that ends up crossing my mind quite a bit.
Yeah, 4 minutes of additional scenes in the Chinese version. I think Iron Man 3 is one of those, Thomas, that it does have a way of exemplifying how major studios will tailor films to suit either political or financial interest, especially abroad, especially during this time. But for me, the question remains, should creative storytelling be compromised for box office success, or should filmmakers kind of resist that political and financial pressure so they can maintain artistic integrity? And I understand filmmaking is a business, but I do think that's a question that still needs to be answered, or asked anyway.
Absolutely. And you kind of, along the same lines of geopolitical tensions and how that makes its way into film and blockbusters, and how certain things might be changed or in other cases might not be changed because of that context. a few years after Iron Man 3 came out, Wonder Woman came out, the Patty Jenkins film starring Gal Gadot. And Gal Gadot is originally from Israel, and did serve in the Israeli Defense Force. And because of her military background there, this film was banned in Lebanon because of conflict between Lebanon and Israel, and that was a decision made by the Lebanese government. That they did not want this film to be shown with her in the lead role. Which this another interesting piece here is that previous films of hers had been shown in Lebanon, Batman v Superman, and then the Fast and Furious films that she was in. But I guess it was to the point where she had reached such a status, and because she was the leading woman here, it kind of reached a point where the government stepped in and said that a line in the sand, essentially.
And Thomas, she was also not just a leading woman, but she was basically leading an army in some of those scenes. So, put that military context into what was happening with her on screen as well.
Exactly. And, conflict in the Middle East continues to play a role in the film industry even up until today. At the time of recording this, the Oscar nominations were recently announced for 2024-2025. The documentary No Other Land, this was made by a collective of Palestinian and Israeli journalists and filmmakers. And it's Oscar nominated, but still does not have a U.S. distributor. And the documentary is quite critical of the Israeli government. And considering the United States' support of Israel throughout the current conflict between Israel and Palestine, it's very sensitive for U.S. distributors to wade into that territory. And I think it's a remarkable film that I think deserves to be seen, but it's very difficult for really anybody who is outside of the film critic, the film journalist sphere, to actually get their hands on the documentary and see it for themselves.
Absolutely. And Thomas, I know that there are some other films right in the same vein that have kind of spoken to you as well, that are connected to kind of what's happening in the world on the political front.
Yeah, absolutely. A few years ago, just before the start of the pandemic, we had a film that was kind of mostly a satire, a very violent satire on relations between, I guess, the left and the right in the United States. And this film was The Hunt. And there was already some tension around this film due to perceptions from really both sides of the political stratosphere over how this film was going to depict them, and some comments from President Trump during his first term as well. And there was a lot of general tension surrounding this film, but it was really delayed due to a really terrible tragedy that happened. A mass shooting in El Paso, Texas. So it was originally supposed to come out in the fall of 2019, and with this mass shooting and just the general tension already surrounding it, it was pushed back another 6 months, and ended up coming out right before lockdown, shut down basically the entire world for a while. And so that was just another example of, not just one specific thing, not just some of the generalized political tension, but other, really tragic external factors that led to, a massive shift in the way this film was distributed.
Absolutely. Thomas, any others you want to make sure you talk about before we start heading toward the finish line here today?
Yeah, well, even today, Sebastian Stan was just nominated for an Oscar for his role in The Apprentice, in his portrayal of Donald Trump and President Donald Trump in this film. was Trump and his legal team attempted to block the distribution of this film due to the way that they thought it might represent him, and due to certain liberties that they felt the film took with the portrayal of his life. And that film, it was released, and it did make its way out to an audience, but there was a time for most of 2024 where a lot of people wonder if this film was ever going to see the light of day.
Absolutely. Well, I want to make sure I mention one more film before we wrap today, Thomas, that at that time it was highly controversial and challenged the norms. Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator in 1940. You talk about satire. There was satire here. There was also censorship in some areas, and there was a resistance for this film. It was written, directed, and starred Chaplin in his first spoken film. It was a political satire that looked at the fascist regimes of like Mussolini and of also Adolf Hitler, released in October of 1940. So the United States was not in World War II at that time. Chaplin produced this independently. It was distributed by Universal Pictures. In the late 1930s, the Hollywood studios tried to avoid political films, especially those that were about Nazi Germany. The United Kingdom hesitated to screen the film because they didn't want to offend Germany. And Spain and Italy, of course, they banned the film until 1975, Thomas. Banned until 1975. And there are also some Latin American countries that were pro-German government countries that tried to limit and ban these screenings. It really is just a phenomenal film, and there's a monologue that if you have not looked and seen that monologue, it is truly a powerful statement about life and about politics and really what we should be exploring. The Great Dictator also paved the way for other satire films like you think about Dr. Strangelove, you think about Jojo Rabbit. Those things happened, I think, because of The Great Dictator. I think this film is a powerful example of how cinema can challenge politics and can question politics. That final speech I mentioned, there's discussions in there about human rights, about resistance, about democracy. This film, truly one of my favorites of all times, and I'm just kind of blown away every time I see it. So despite the backlash that The Great Dictator had, I think it helped shape the film community, and it actually speaks to discussions about dictatorship, propaganda, and free speech. So The Great Dictator, one of those I wanted to make sure I got a chance to mention. Final thoughts or comments before we wrap things up, Thomas?
And that was Charlie Chaplin's first speaking role in a film, and he certainly made his words count. Like you mentioned, the monologue speech at the end of the film. I think you can apply that to every moment in every moment in modern human history. There's a certain circumstance that you can apply the words of his speech to, and it's truly timeless.
Really appreciate you guys spending time with us as we talk about films and filmmakers that faced boycotts, bans, and barricades to creating their work and getting that work out there. And this has been a multi-part series. We will probably come back with more. I want to leave us with a quote from Charlie Chaplin. Movies are a means to an end, but that end is the freedom to express your ideas and beliefs. Appreciate you spending time with us right here on Meet Me at the Movies, and for the entire cast and crew for this week, for Thomas Manning, I'm Noel T. Manning II, and that is a wrap.